Now for the really fun part. So, God is indeed in the details. I think that we don't think this often, but God is in the details. God is in all the things that we do together. And so we're going to talk about details now. First, God's in the numbers. So let's talk a little bit about numbers. Every year, every Episcopal parish has to report numbers. We have to submit a parochial report, and all sorts of decisions at the diocesan and national level are made based on these reports. So I just wanted to show you what our report says and talk a little bit about what I think this says about this last year. I've given you a comparison of the last of 2019 to 2020. We confirmed, baptized and confirmed, received 3 people. We actually did not lose anybody in our immediate community to death. We did lose friends and family to death. So we lost Sam Rollins, Ashley's father. We lost Terrence Rollins, I think a distant cousin in San Francisco. And so we have lost some folks that have related to us, but not directly as a part of our community, which frankly, given the circumstances of the year, I think is astonishing and God's grace to us. We have 53 adult members, 13 youth members, 66 total members, and we have 7 active attenders. I have received the question from a number of people, what's the difference between a member and attender? The Episcopal Church has very strict guidelines for what counts as a member of a parish. You have to have been baptized, confirmed, and receiving the Eucharist in a given parish up to 3 times per year, which technically means none of us have been a member this year since we haven't had 3 Eucharists. But you also have to be enrolled at this particular parish. We have a number of folks who have not been baptized, confirmed, received, or are not enrolled only in this parish, but I consider them active participants in our life together. And so I make sure that they get on our reports because I think it's important that membership in my mind is actually broader than how it's technically defined. So we lost a little bit in membership and participation over the course of the year. But given that it's COVID, that is actually, we're really quite stable. Our attendance on Sundays has significantly shifted. So our average attendance went from 36 to 27. And that's really primarily because the big Sundays, such as Easter and Christmas, they were not particularly large this year. We basically had a steady attendance throughout all year. So we've varied basically between like 25 and 35 people throughout the entire year on Zoom services. Zoom is a hard way to worship. It's not easy. And so I think that's reflected in both the drop of numbers, but also those numbers have actually been increasing as the year has gone up, as I think people have become more comfortable with Zoom and perhaps as we've become a little bit better at figuring out how to do it. But we haven't had the big Sundays. So, Easter last year was 70 people. This year, it was our normal amount. We had, the people who come every Sunday come to Easter. No more Easter Christmas Christians right now. I think Zoom has people just, they don't necessarily join, or they go to bigger churches that can do much fancier and bigger services than we can do. And then that's okay. I think that COVID has had an effect, but it has not dramatically affected us in some of the ways that I thought that it might. As a matter of fact, I think that in some ways, our ability to be together and to come on Sundays and to see each other's face, that is really beautiful. And it has actually made me think a little bit about how do we want to come back together when we can be in physical space? Do we want to change the shape of how we sit together and be together so that we can see and share a little bit more? There's all sorts of different ways that we can worship together. And I think Zoom has kind of opened up some things for us, even as it has been a struggle as well. And so I look forward to talking about that with you and reflecting with you on what does it mean for our Sunday worship together, this kind of some of the things that we have benefited from in Zoom, how do we keep those, not just our praying together, but one of the things people have mentioned to me is the ways in which We actually share after church together. Like we have to have a conversation together. The parish hall coffee hour is a little bit like high school sometimes. You know, we have our groups that we sit with, and we always sit at the same table with the same people because we want to see them and they're our friends, and we probably only see them on Sundays. But Zoom has made that impossible, right? We're all together in one room, and it means that we're having a conversation with people that we don't normally have conversations with, and we're hearing things that we might not normally hear. And so I'm really curious about how do we continue that into our future, because I think it has actually been a real benefit to our relationships and our community. And I know that there are people that have felt much more a part of things because we have this kind of different format. And so those are things that I want to explore. So even as our numbers have kind of been, they're pretty wonky and shifted from last year, at the same time, there's a kind of steadiness in them that I think has been, that says a lot about our commitment to being together as a community. Pledges and financial support. Zoom has had a pretty significant effect here. On the one hand, because frankly, most of our parish is made up of retired folks, our income has not been affected in the same way. We have had some folks who have moved on to other parishes. We've also had some folks who have lost their jobs or significantly lost at least a portion of their income. And that has affected the pledges that have come in. So our annual pledge for 2020 was $59,000. Only about $49,000 of that came in as named pledges. And what I mean by that is only $49,000 of money that we can connect to a specific person who made a pledge came in. So there's some folks who weren't able to meet their pledges this year, and that is entirely understandable given Zoom. That, and I don't, but I want to note here, this line right here where it says 58,000 right here. So we actually still got about what people pledged. So this number here for total loose plate gifts pledges is actually higher than we budgeted, and it meets the pledge amount. So I have to admit, there's a part of me that's a little concerned that people gave money against their pledges and we didn't get it recorded correctly. But the other thing is people have been giving gifts or larger amounts of money when they're able to. And so that has been great. So individual pledges, they're lower than proportionally than we met last year, but we're still bringing in what we said that we would bring in. And that's wonderful. So I just want to thank all of you for that. That has been extremely helpful for us. We still have, basic costs, the building, salaries. We want to support our staff. We still have utilities. None of that stuff has shifted significantly because of Zoom. And so your commitment to follow through and to be generous to the church has been really wonderful. We did receive this grant right here, $25,000. This is the EBOF grant last year. 2020 is actually 2019 was the last year of the first EBOF grant. This is the first payment of a second 3-year EBOF grant. So you'll see this $25,000 for the next 2 years after this. And then we did, this other revenue right here is for the parking lot. Ironically, no one's parked in the parking lot. The library hasn't been there, but they still rent it, and that lease is being renewed for the next year. I do want to talk a little bit about pledges for this coming year. So for 2021, $57,000 has been pledged. So that's a little bit of a drop from last year, but given that there are a number of pledgers, large pledgers, such as frankly Betty Smith, she is not pledging, obviously, and so that number actually has not dropped as much as it could have dropped. What's shifted, and I think I want to note this because I think the reality of COVID is playing out, is that we had 20 folks increase their pledge. We had a number of folks decrease their pledge. And I think that is almost entirely due to income. is people's incomes is much more fragile right now, or they're having to support friends and family who have lost jobs. So just because we are retired does not mean that our family is. And so I think more income is being used to support people who have lost their jobs and income due to COVID. And that's going to continue throughout the year. And so that is an expected drop. We've had 9 folks who pledged last year who have not pledged this year. And I'm again assuming that that is due to financial situations. If you've forgotten to put your pledge in or just haven't gotten to it, please let us know. But again, COVID is affecting kind of where we're at. What's amazing to me is that given this shift, that we actually, our pledges are really pretty close to what they were last year. That's really wonderful and generous of all of you. A number of folks have increased their pledges. So thank you very much. I sincerely appreciate your ability to be generous in that way. Just a quick note as to our current assets. We have $41,000 in our checking account. My clergy discretionary fund is actually quite flush right now. This is a fairly large amount for a clergy person at a parish of our size. And that's in large part because, we have not been around the parish as much, so there haven't been quite as many direct asks for money. But also, this is a financially stable parish. There have been some places where I have assisted people with a few things. But I also want to let you know, recently I purchased probably about $1,000 worth of gift cards for Fred Meyer's, so that I could, because I don't hand out cash at the church. I wanted to be able to have an easier way to provide for people and families who need food. So that's one way that I have used the discretionary fund. There also have been a few situations where somebody has asked me on behalf of somebody else if they can help them, and I've said yes, and then I can just reimburse out of that. So I want you to know there is a discretionary fund available. If you or someone you know needs it, please let me know. I can't pay things like reoccurring rent, but I can help with rent on occasion. In some cases, I've helped with rent, and that person has eventually paid back when the balance when things have balanced out again. And I don't require that, but I think that some people, need temporary help, but are able to step in, and other people need help permanently. So just know that there is some money available that I have the discretion to use. And I'm happy to help when that is possible and reasonable. The new bookkeeper has actually literally this week updated our mutual funds. We have some mutual investment funds in a PAX account, which is with the diocese, and a U.S. bank, which is also with the diocese. So these are assets that are untouched. They basically sit and earn interest. And then I wanted to point out to you the $140,000 in our savings account. So we did apply for a grant for the Board of Trustees, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but we did get that money, and they actually gave it to us at the end of last year. And we deposited in our checking account, and I put a chunk of it in the savings account so that it was earning at least a little bit of interest until we spend it. We will be drawing on this to supplement the checking account as we need to, since it is grant money meant to be spent over the course of this year or the next year. And so that's why that number is so large right now. And frankly, our checking account is this large because of the grant as well. Without the grant, this checking account, we would be pulling on savings at the end of this year, which is, we talked about that last year as a part of our annual budget. So we are being currently supported by a 5-year grant. The Diocese of Oregon, the Board of Trustees has given us a 5-year grant that totals over the course of 5 years, I think it's $535,000. It's a step down grant, so we'll get more at the beginning than we will get at the end. So we need to be responsible in how we spend that and make sure that we're budgeting it out. Partly the reason that it's more at the beginning is because some of that money is for fees specifically around exploring, developing affordable housing. It costs money to do that. And so a part of it is we've worked with Second Stories as a developer, and I will talk a little bit more about them later. Worked with Second Stories as a developer, and we're paying them. They've basically been working for free for the entire year. And so we are paying them. And then there's some things like building surveys. We've actually had to do a more formal asbestos survey. There's oil tank survey going on right now, since the oil tank was removed, but it was removed in the 80s, and the code in the 80s is different than the code now. And so we actually need to make sure that if we do any construction, it has to meet current code. And so there's some environmental surveys and building survey folks that we're paying in order to do some work. So this is just a quick summary of the grant. The full grant is available online. I've sent out announcements about it. So if you want to read about that, you can. Now, the grant is primarily for funding staffing. So not only is it going to fund my position as full-time starting February 1st, but it will also fund, we've written into it some other positions, including bookkeeping, communications, some things that I think will be helpful, because the reality is, as we move forward with affordable housing, that is going to take me, I've asked other priests and pastors who have done affordable housing with parishes, and they said that when you're in the heat of building housing and all the pieces that go with it, it's 25 to 30 hours a week. That's a lot of time in a normal work week. And I want to make sure that some of the other needs that we need to meet as a parish, because we're a parish as well as an affordable housing project, that those needs are being met. And so some of that will be hiring some staff to assist me in doing some administrative work. One thing I think has been kind of a hole has been communications. I just can't get it out enough. I can do it, but I can't then write it up and get it sent out and post it in all the places. And so there's some things that I would like to improve on. I'd like to hire someone to help write grants. We'll talk a little bit about our fabulous grant writers later on. But grant writing is, I think, going to be pretty important for our future for a little while. And so having someone to do that, I've thought about hiring someone to help do some community organizing. This is a part of the life and the history of the parish. And I think having someone who is connected with the community and young and able to reach out and engage is something that I would like to explore. So that's partly the reason the grant is bigger at the beginning, is there's some positions in there to hire to help us help kind of do this 5-year plan and figure out what that is. And you will hear about those positions as I sort of figure out what I think is the most helpful and strategic in the moment. Okay. You know what, given that, let me just go straight to budget. I want to give people an opportunity to ask questions, and we'll have a longer discussion time at the end. But let's talk about the annual budget then. So given the 5-year plan and the grants, our annual budget looks really different this year than it did last year. So I didn't give you the figures here because I didn't want to overwhelm us, but our actual versus the budget for 2020 was quite good. We actually, our budget was a deficit budget of about $35,000 to $40,000 last year. I can't quite remember the figure. We only came in at a deficit of $14,000. So we are working pretty hard to reduce expenses where we can. Now, a part of that is because every year we budget about $10,000 in repairs on the building, and we didn't do that this year. So it's a little bit of a false positive, I guess. But a part of that is we haven't spent money in some other areas, and we've been saving where we can. This year's budget is significantly different. So we went from $100,000 revenue with the expectation of almost $500,000 in revenue. I want to be very clear. This figure right here in green, this is grant money. I don't anticipate that we as a parish are going to be able to raise $500,000. We will be getting that in grants. We are going to apply to a number of grants. We've already applied to, we've got the Board of Trustees grant. We've applied to the African American Historical Preservation grant with the National Trust. It's a huge grant. We've applied for that specifically for building repairs. So you see this figure right here of $150,000 in building repair. That's for the roof. That's for things that we have put off repairing in light of the affordable housing build and how that might affect our building. And it looks like, and I'll talk about this, it looks like, I'll talk about this again later in more detail, but it looks like we're going to probably keep our building, which is great. But it means we need to do some repairs on it. So we've applied for money to do that. You can see these housing pre-development fees. These include lawyers, they include surveyors, it includes there's a variety of fees that are in there. This is a somewhat inflated number because frankly, I think that when lawyers tell me how much they are going to charge us, it's never that. And so I wanted to make sure we've budgeted what I think we need. But these green numbers here, and then this green here compensation, so this is that staffing that I mentioned, all of this is dependent on getting this. If we do not get the grants, we will not be spending this money. So I just want to reassure you, just because our budget says that we can spend it, it is conditional on actually getting grants to fund these things. And this is a small deficit budget. It wasn't a deficit budget until the vestry met on this last January, and we decided that actually we needed to pay both Michael, our sexton, and Angie, our cook, a little bit better than we were. And so we recalculated their wages and made sure that we were properly calculating taxes this time. And so it's a smaller deficit budget. And again, that deficit will depend entirely on whether we actually hire the staffing and whatnot that we can. And if you want to see the full budget, it is available online. By the way, I will send out, I'll make a PDF of all of this and I can mail it to you so that you have a physical copy if you would like to have one. I just wanted to show you what the budget looks like without grants, because I think it's important that we understand that right now we are being supported by grants. And if those grants disappear, things significantly change in terms of what St. Philip's can do. So I took out the grants. And so this is the actual revenue without grants. So $64,000. That's what we would expect this year. And I just wanted to show you what that $64,000 might do. So no staff, the net for the church is positive. If you had supply clergy only, the admin and sexton at current hours, it's about $18,000 of a deficit budget. So that means that if the church did that, it would be pulling from savings or from those investment accounts. Half-time clergy, which is what I have been up until now, it would be $31,000. Now, note, this doesn't include the EBOF grant, which is why it's so much different than we had, than we actually did, is because I just pulled out all grant money. And so I just want to put this here so that we understand that long-term, once the grants dry up or we've finished the 5-year plan, long-term, we will again need to revisit how it is that we fundraise and the kind of staffing that the church can support. Whoops, that's not the button I meant to press. And in light of that, I wanted to share a little bit with you about the projected income. So we'll talk more about the housing project, who it's going to serve, but one of the pieces of the housing project is that it may bring us some income as a parish. We may be able to earn, basically it's complicated language, but off the lease or the rental of our land and the units that are on it. Now, because we have committed as a parish to not build market rate housing, to not even build 60 MFI, but to stay in the 30 to 50 MFI range. And I'll show you a slide on that why. Because we've committed to that, we're actually committing to earn less money on it. Most development projects would take a look at these figures and think this is completely unreasonable. It's not worth the effort. It's not enough of a profit, but we're a church and profit isn't our primary motive. In theory, we could be earning somewhere in the range of, so let's see, facility revenue right here is $39,000. This is the minimum of what we might be able to earn a year. That's probably about 30% of our operating expenses, which is about all a church should rely on for, and my understanding is if you're going to build housing, you should really only expect about 30% of your income to come from that. But what it does do is it means that in all three of the scenarios, the no staff, the supply clergy, and the half-time clergy, the church is still in the black. So hopefully a part of what we're doing is becoming a more sustainable parish. Now, it's not a full-time clergy salary, it's a half-time clergy salary. And so full-time is a different kettle of fish there.